According to a study, 65% of our daily conversations are based on stories. And it sounds like a lot, isn't it? But when you think about it, just take a moment. What did you share or told others today? And I bet most of it were little stories. Fun stories, stories about our daily frustrations, stories about our colleagues, or we like to tell little bad stories about our enemies too. And we cannot stop them. Even at night, our minds continue with storytelling. Dreams are a really creative way of storytelling. Sometimes a bit too creative, to be honest, but still, even these dreams are all story-based. And why does this matter for training? And how can we use it for training? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, my name is Danny de Bruin, one of the co-founders of Warp VR, and I work with over 25 enterprise clients to create immersive scenarios. And previously I worked as a director for major video productions, and now as a father of 2 little girls, I'm getting even better at storytelling. Today we're going to talk about what is a story-based approach in training. When does it make a story-based approach make a bigger impact than traditional ways of learning, and how? We will have a great discussion with Dajo Leunge as a story writing expert. We will tell you how you can implement what you learned today in your immersive scenarios. And we will end up this webinar with a Q&A. If you have any questions, write them in the chat because we are curious to learn your thoughts as well. So without further ado, let's start with the first question. And that is, what is a story-based approach in training? And we all know stories, right? Books, film, documentaries, video games, even music. And I can be very short to answer this question. When you communicate information in the context of a story, you have a story-based approach. And it sounds easy, and I will give you some more practical examples later on. But for now, I can imagine that you're questioning yourself, hey, can I write stories? Am I able to write stories? And believe me, yes, you are. For centuries, humans have passed on knowledge through stories. We think in stories. It's just a matter of doing. So why does this matter for training? First of all, good storytelling triggers the brain into releasing cortisol, which enables humans to focus, and it grabs attention. Secondly, and that's also the second chemical that it's released, that's oxytocin. And that enables empathy. And when your learners start to see themselves in the story, start to identify with it, they start to care. They start to feel emotions. And emotions are important because they motivate us. Stories can compel your learners to take action. And that's really, really powerful. And lastly, emotions enables better retention. Most of what we remember from learning experiences are the feelings of underlying messages rather than the multitude of small facts. And we will dive into this question a little bit more together with Dajo later on. So let's move on to the next question, and that is, when does a story-based approach makes a bigger impact than traditional ways of learning, and how? So for certain learning objectives, it's quite a challenge to prepare your workforce or your employees emotionally, right? So we see this in safety training, but as well in security or soft skill training, for example. So let's start with safety training. I will give you an example where I myself can fantasize a lot about, and that's a bank robbery. So when you need to train your employees on a bank robbery, it's really important that you let them experience it themselves as true to life as possible. Because we just learned that storytelling enables emotions. And when we feel strong emotions, our brains record every detail of that situation because it wants to help us avoid similar situations in the future. So when your employees have to handle a real bank robbery, their brains can tap into the learning experience, the story-based learning experience, so they know how to handle their own emotions. They know what to do in that situation. And we know this for a fact because we got a trainee who sent us an email, and she told us that she did a bank robbery training made in Warp Studio. And it's also a sad story because some weeks later, she had to handle a real bank robbery. And she told us that she knew exactly what to do. She already looked her face in the eyes, and she knew what to do in that situation. And it always gives me goosebumps when I tell this story, because for me, and I know for my colleagues as well, this is the essential thing why we believe storytelling should be a tool for every learning and development specialist. Another example for safety training is a Cpr training. And yes, you need to train the physical part on a mannequin. You have to feel how hard you have to press, etc., etc. But we believe that it's also important, and maybe as important, that you also train the emotional part. So let's say you are at a party with some loved ones, right? And at some point you see an old friend, and you haven't seen that friend for years. You start a conversation, you have a blast. It's really a fun time. But suddenly you hear a loud bang, and you hear someone screaming. And you look, and you see that someone's laying down at the floor. Are you prepared for that? Do you know what you will feel? Do you know if you will be overwhelmed with feelings? And if it's not you, for sure bystanders will be very emotional. And do you know, under those circumstances, how to perform the procedure? And I believe you can train this with a story-based scenario. So when we talk about security, let's imagine a data center. So you are a security officer. It's your responsibility to decide who may enter the building. And that sounds like an easy task, right? You just check the credentials and that's it. But the human brain is hardwired for empathy. And the bad guys do know this as well. So in a recent talk with the police, Dutch police, I learned that even the best security officers can fall for a sad story of a criminal. And it happens. With storytelling, you can have your employees prepared for this. Let someone really impressive, someone with status, someone who knows people, or maybe someone who has a lot of knowledge about the law, try to impress your employees so they can feel their own feelings, experience their own feelings, and train that. And you can teach them what you expect as a company, what they should do in such a situation. And the last example is about soft skills. I can imagine that when you have to bring someone bad news, it can be very helpful to try a conversation the day before. Because knowing the method or knowing the procedure is one thing, but to look someone in the eyes and have to deal with a particular reaction when you bring bad news, that's something else. And nowadays, this is already being trained by with actors in a face-to-face training, in role-playing, maybe even in classrooms. But with immersive scenarios, you can digitize this. And that enables you to do this in a scalable and repeatable way. I think these are enough examples for now. And I think it's time to introduce my guest of today. And I'm excited about this part. I got him tipped by one of the teachers of the Dutch Film Academy as a rising star. He is a finalist of the Netflix New Voices competition. He also participates in the Videoland Academy, which is the Dutch Netflix. He won several prizes as a scenario writer, and he has a background in communication science. And that is Dajo Leunge. Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome, man. Good to see you. Before we start, maybe a little introduction about yourself. How did you end up in the Netflix competition?
Yes, how did I end up there? Well, I studied screenwriting at the film school here in Amsterdam. I think writing and also film, I have a great passion for film. I've always had that, I think, since lower school. So it's always been there, and writing as well. And I decided to do screenwriting to kind of combine those two passions. And after I graduated, I made some short films, and I applied for the Netflix competition, which is for starting talent. And I got in, so that's very cool. And I also did some projects on the side. I'm developing TV shows because everyone watches series nowadays. And it's a great way to tell stories because you have the long form, and it's a great way to develop character and take your time with that. So it's just that's the thing when you're writing for film. It's a lot of film applications you do to different parties and streamers. But so far it's going pretty well.
Yeah, because I know your portfolio a bit, and you started with short movies a lot, right?
Yeah,
at the Academy as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, especially on the film school, you start with short films. Like you started with 5 minutes, then you do 10, and then you do like 30 minutes. And Netflix is a feature film, so that's like 90 minutes. And actually, I'm now doing for Videoland Academy, which is actually next to Netflix, the biggest streamer in the Netherlands. I'm making a horror film, which is like 50 minutes. They call it mid-length. And that's getting made. So that's sometimes you also write things that you're like, I'm not sure if this is going to get made, but that's definitely going to get made. So yeah.
Cool, man. Sometimes you help us writing scenarios as well.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I do. I've done this now for 2 years, I think. Actually, pretty quickly after I graduated, because a teacher of mine recommended me to you. And actually, we did do some things with VR on school as well. We've had some people over and who showed us all kinds of different ways to approach. It's also very arty, but also kind of more training based. So I've had some affinity with it, but haven't actually wrote a screenplay for it. So it's also for me been a kind of a discovery how to apply storytelling. But I found it went kind of natural. It's very natural form to apply it to, I feel. So yeah, it's been a great learning experience as well for me. Yeah, and I think for you as well. We learn from each other. Yeah, it's a great collaboration.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, so we have some more examples later on as well on what I've learned from you. But the first question, and I already answered it myself, but you as a story writing expert, how would you define a story-based approach in training?
Well, I think it's about, when we talk about learning and training, you can talk about learning facts and learning sort of the procedure of things. But I think it's very much about learning by experiencing. So storytelling is always about stepping into someone else's shoes and experiencing a different world or a different story, and which is very applicable to training as well, because it enables you to take another point of view and to learn by experiencing that. And also a very, very important thing is storytelling is about cause and effect. And this is also how real life works, how we reflect on real life. You do this and therefore this happens. And when you just get presented facts like this is how you should do something, you won't retain it as well. But when you train it by using emotion and character choices and things that engage us as human beings, I think that's a much better way of learning things. So that's how I actually approach it, kind of like I do my own stories in film or TV. It's a different form, but it's in the end it's stories, like you said it. We do it all day. We do even in news programs or whatever it is. It's all about narrative, cause and effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just curious, do you see a difference when we talk about immersive scenarios rather than just maybe other ways of story-based training?
Well, the difference is, of course, that you can try different routes in training, especially the kinds of trainings that we write. So I think that's different. Like when you watch a film, it just washes over you and you kind of experience it. But here you can more kind of explore different areas of a story. and you can there's more control for the player, for the one who's experiencing the story, because you can decide where to look or who to talk to, and you can do that in a movie, of course. So that's different. You can't edit as well as much as you can in a film, but so it's a different form. But I think the essentials of story are there.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me as a video creator, the big difference is that normally you can really determine where to look, right?
Exactly.
So with framing, and now you can't, because they can look all around, so you have to handle that in a different way.
Yeah.
And you now see on Netflix some interactive stories, right?
Yeah, that's right. I believe there was one where you can, well, actually the same that we sometimes do. You can choose like 3 paths, and then you end up with, I think, 20 different endings. So everyone has experienced something else. But it's true. But we do try to sometimes, steer people towards certain, like with a sound, you can control certain choices. But yeah, it's different, definitely. Yeah.
I'm that person that tries every different route.
Like we do want to have some control. Yeah, but it's,
I want to know.
Yeah, you want to know. But I think that's good, because you kind of force players to explore as well.
Yeah.
But you do give them some tools or some guidance, which is also how gaming works, I think. When you look at game design, it's kind of the same thing. They also use visual cues or sounds to help you along the way.
Yeah. For me, the biggest example is with Mario. Mario always starts on the left of the screen. And you have room on the right, so it guides you to walk that way. And these are mechanics that we can use in immersive scenarios as well. But the difference in an interactive film or a immersive scenario is that in a film, you are a spectator. But in an interactive scenario, story-based scenario, you are a participant. You have to decide what to do.
Yeah, that's true. But I think what they have in common is empathy and emotion. They both have that.
Yeah. So why are emotion and empathy important for training?
Well, I think it's like essential human connection, having essential human connection to a story, because we as humans are we're all extremely able to latch onto emotions. So as soon as we see someone experiencing an emotion, which can be sadness or anxiety or happiness, can be anything, we immediately latch onto that. We recognize it very well. It's the thing we're most capable of. And when we couple that to choices based in training, we retain the underlying feeling as well. Also, when you watch a movie, you're not just remembering the plot points. I mean, probably some people do, but when you're not actively doing that, you will remember the plot points when they're underlined with emotion, when a character is making a plot choice based on emotion, which is what we're trying to do in training as well. That's why we apply the storytelling to training, to create that empathy for the character that you're embodying, and also for the other characters. I think in the training, it's also very important to have that, to understand why they are there, why they want a certain thing from you. Empathy, it's why you are engaged and why you learn. Yeah.
And I think for you as a writer as well, and I know the difference. When you write for film, you, the hero or the main character, you can completely decide how that person feels and what the person does, and also to create the journey of that, an interesting journey, right? But now the main character, the hero of the story, is a player, and you don't know who that is.
Yeah.
So how do you handle that?
Yeah, that's difficult. I also think then people, but actually it's not that different from a traditional hero's journey, which is like a Luke Skywalker, say for example in Star Wars. They're often kind of blank slates on which we can project our own feelings and our own heroic desires or whatever. So actually when you put on the glasses and experience a story through the hero's eyes, it's not that different. Actually, most people say the hero is the least interesting character because, that's why they are those blank slates, because we can project our own desires and emotion on them, and because the goal of a hero is also very clear. So it's a very clear character. But it's more difficult to apply emotion in VR, I think, because you can see him or her. but because the engagement is so strong, it's such an immediate experience with the character. It's kind of intimate almost. So it's very easy to step into the shoes of that character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe even more with scenario-based training, you need to develop interesting or characteristics of the other characters in the story.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's also how others perceive you. It's like other people are a mirror of your own character. So when you say a certain thing, or you decide to say a certain thing or do a certain thing, people will respond to that in a certain way, and that will give you some idea of who you are or what your place is within a certain environment or company or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I notice when I do workshops or when I help clients writing scenarios, that sometimes they say, okay, yeah, but then the player is scared, or then the player is angry, or but I think that's really important, is that you cannot decide how the player feels, or you cannot even decide where the player looks, right? So you have to have that, as you told, as clean as possible, and really focus on how can I trigger certain behavior or certain emotions. But you're never sure, maybe I get angry and you get sad, or the other way around, right? In the same situation. So.
Yeah, but I think that's a good thing, because in training, the training is about how you experience a certain situation and how you are being prepared for something. So it's actually good that everybody experiences it differently. That's what makes it unique as a storytelling form, which is different from film or TV, which is all being predetermined. So it's good that you bring your own experience, expertise, and point of view to it. I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
Maybe let's zoom in a little bit more in the difference between a linear story, what we see in film, and a nonlinear story.
Yeah, I think it's about experiencing versus exploring, because in nonlinear storytelling you can explore different paths, different routes, and you can try again and make mistakes. So yeah, that's very different from a linear story, which you will just experience from beginning to end without stopping. So that's very different. But I do think also a non-linear story has to move forward in the end, because you can keep making mistakes and try different routes, but at the end you will make the decision that you're happy with or that works, and then you have to move forward. So it's more, it's non-linear, but it does move towards an end. I think they both do. And there are also non-linear stories in film, of course, but that's more structure-based, because the creator wants you to experience it a certain way. And here it's more about making choices and trying different things. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we talk about emotion in a story, how can you, because I think this is a very important part and something I also learned from you, how can you build tension in a story?
Yes. Yeah, tension, that's actually a great way to engage people, because it's also it's also based in emotion, I think, because we all know what tension feels like, and for some reason we find it not as pleasant in real life, but we find it very pleasant when we watch films or TV, because we can experience it from the safety of our homes. What the essential components of tension are hope and fear. So there has to be a balance between having hope that something will succeed, that the character will succeed, or the player, that you will succeed in your goal, but also a fear that it might go wrong. So obstacles that will prevent you from getting what you want. When it's out of balance, so when there's only fear and no hope, there's no tension, because you're like, okay, well, there's no way I can do this. But when there's no fear and only hope, then it's like, oh, this is easy. I can just walk to that and I'll achieve my goal, and there's no tension. So there always has to be that balance between hope and fear, I think. Yeah.
And do you have some examples of maybe tools or ways that they apply in a film that we can apply as well in an immersive scenario?
Yeah, there are definitely tools. Well, the most important thing is first knowing, of course, what your character wants. Like, that's a very essential thing, because the tension will depend on that, whether that will whether he or she will succeed or not.
And with the character, do you mean the player or other characters?
I'm now talking about the story, but I mean the player as well. Yeah, the main character, the one you're a protagonist. You're the player. Yeah. Well, there are some tools, and there's a good example from Alfred Hitchcock, who they say is the master of suspense, and he always said it's the example of the bomb under the table. So it's showing that the bomb under the table will explode in like 1 minute, and the characters at the table don't know that, but you, the audience, knows that. So in a game, it could also be knowing that a certain event will happen, will disrupt everything, and your character has to achieve something within that time frame. It creates tension immediately. It's also kind of dramatic. You can play with it. You can apply a dramatic irony, which is knowing more than your character, or you can experience it with your character, like knowing what's at stake, what can go wrong within a certain time frame. And we use that a lot, actually. The time, like the ticking clock. You have to achieve something within a certain amount of minutes. Yeah, it just it ramps up the tension. It's a great way to do that.
Yeah, in Warp Studio you can apply a timer, and you can make it visible on non-visible and or invisible. And I know for myself, when I start seeing the clock, the countdown, I just get sweaty palms. It's just like, now I have to be quick. I need to be in time.
Yeah, you have to be quick, and it has to work. Like you have to do it as well as you can within that time frame.
Yeah, great way.
So it's a great way to add suspense, and it's also why it's in all like action movies and Bond movies. Yeah, because it works.
So when you would like to start writing a scenario, I learned from you. You start with a story outline.
Yeah.
Where does one start writing a story outline?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, actually, it first always starts with an idea, of course, that can come from anything. But then you have to actually start developing it and writing it. And for me, what's a great way to do it is, like you said, a story outline, because it's a great way to get a grasp on the structure and the essence of the story. And there are a few elements that have to be applied to the story structure that can be applied to all kinds of stories, whether it's film or VR or whatever. First is knowing who is your main character, who is the protagonist, who is experiencing this story. So it's the player in VR, of course. Then what does he or she want? What's the game goal or the goal in general? Because it immediately also gives a sense of forward movement, which is what we want in storytelling. Then what's the central conflict? What's the thing that makes it hard to achieve that goal? And also we talk about the arena. Where does your story take place? It's a very important thing because it has to support your story. It has to say something about the story as well, which in training I think is very important because like you gave the example about the bank. Of course, the bank is the obvious arena, but which areas do you choose where you do the training? And also a very important one, which is it's also important for training, I think, is why do you want to tell this story, and not just why, but also why do you want to tell this story, which is. I think film and TV can be a more personal answer, but for training it can also be an answer that is more based in necessity, or why is this important for employees or trainees to. But I think that's important because it gives a sense of urgency and a sense of necessity to it.
Yeah, I think that nowadays learning and development specialists also have to think about business impact. So not only a training anymore, but also how can this training contribute to a business impact? Yeah, exactly. So that could be the personal goal, right?
Yeah, that's definitely, that could be the answer to that question. Yeah. Because otherwise it will just be, okay, we're doing this, but we're not sure why. And sometimes you do know it in the back of your head, but it's very helpful to write it down or just know it for yourself why you're doing this, why you're writing it. Because it also allows you to kind of test every choice against that personal goal that you have.
Great. Hey, and so you have a kind of structure. I know that when we create scenarios together, we also have a good interview some good research
yes.
with some experts, right?
Yes, very important. Yeah.
And why is it important, Dajo?
Well, because we want to, well, they always say write what you know, and sometimes you don't know. So you have to do research, especially in training, because I can write something about opening a safe in a bank, but I don't know anything about that. So I need the expertise of people who do know that to make it realistic and make it believable. So it's, yeah, that's why it's important, because we do want to, you don't want to experience a certain training and like, oh, this is very unbelievable or unrealistic. It has to feel like you're actually there, like someone did the work with all the details and that they're correct. And especially in training, all the choices, the right choices have to be, those are the training points that you want to give to the player. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I believe that immersive scenarios have the ability to get as true to life as possible, right? It's just a way of training that's true to life.
Yeah.
But when you create a realistic environment, right, that's much easier for the learner to engage in that training.
Yeah,
do you agree?
Definitely. Yeah. That's it's all about engagement. As soon as someone, and this is in all kinds of storytelling, will have a sense of something's off or it's not, I don't believe this, they're gone. You've lost them. So it's, it has to be believable. It has to be realistic and true to life. It's very important. Yeah.
So as an expert, do you have some other tools, storytelling tools or techniques that we can learn from you?
Yeah, so on top of those essential story elements, I think a lot of people will benefit from a sense of structure and control, because storytelling can be very messy as well. So actually a tried and true structure is the 3-act structure. It's been used since like Greek tragedy, so it's been there for thousands of years, because it is very innate to the way we tell stories. So you have a clear Act 1 beginning, a setup, who's your character, main character, what's the inciting incident, so that's the moment the story is being set in motion, which can range from a bomb exploding in the city to a customer walking towards your bank desk and wanting to open a safe. It can be anything, just the thing that sets the story in motion. And then we break into Act 2, which is where all the obstacles are being introduced and your character has to make all those difficult choices. And the 3rd act is where all those conflicts and obstacles come to a climax and your character has to make the ultimate choice to go one way or the other, and then there will be a resolution and the film or the story ends. So it's very clearly, when you like visualize it, it's kind of those classic waves in the story, the rising action, falling action. It's a great way to get a grasp on structure, I think.
And again, does this differ with a nonlinear story, because then you have multiple outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's the same in the sense that those conflict, like when you zoom in on the 2nd act, there will be little bows of rising and falling action, and I think in training there will be a lot of those, because there will be different obstacles being thrown your way all the time. But there will come a moment where you have to end the story, where a character will end up where he or she wants to end up and achieve his or her goal. And then there will be a resolution, which in training will mostly be kind of a reflection on what you've done. So I think it's the same. You can definitely apply those tools to nonlinear storytelling as well. They actually found that in nonlinear storytelling, movies like Pulp Fiction, for example, when you zoom in, the structure is actually the same. It's just kind of mixed up, but it's basically the same thing. Yeah.
Cool. Hey, maybe last question for now, and I want to ask you as well to join the Q&A. But what I learned from you that's really made a difference for me in how I create scenarios is the use of conflicts. I believe it's such a powerful tool in scenario writing. Can you explain a little bit what that is and how you can use it in training?
Yeah, so conflict is actually what drama is. So when we talk about drama in fiction, in storytelling, it's all about conflict. It's about when a character wants something, there will be obstacles, and those obstacles can be in different forms. It can be another human being who wants something else, and then they clash. That's an interpersonal conflicts, but you can also introduce external obstacles, which whatever will prevent your character from achieving his or her goal. So there's actually a rule in screenwriting. We also talk about scenes, when scenes in which a certain conflict happens, there's no scene that doesn't turn. So there always has to be a turn, and that turn will always be kind of a conflict. So you're like, okay, nice working day, everything will go smooth, but then a customer will come and he or she will be difficult or want something that's just impossible to get without a certain paper or whatever. So immediately there will be a turning point in the scene, which is the conflict or an obstacle or whatever. And it's just the perfect way to create tension, to create drama, to create the engagement. It will loosen the emotions. That's what it's all about, actually. Yeah.
And for me, it's a tool to create the right challenge within a scenario. Right? Yeah. So I think an effective scenario has to have the right questions. And it shouldn't be too obvious. And then with conflicts, you can create a more. So we and I cannot talk about details about this scenario. But we made a scenario for a client, and either way, you have two options. But either way, it will cost you something, right? And then it becomes to start. You really have to think for a moment. Okay, do I go left or right? Because I will lose something. And sometimes in real life that happens too, right? There is no, you have to choose between two
evils. That's the kind of the dilemmas that I also try to introduce in storytelling. So both choices can be wrong, but you have to choose because sometimes that's how life works. And those are very powerful dramatic tools because people will immediately be like, "Ooh, that's exciting and tense, and what will he or she do?" And especially when you are the person having to make that call, that's hard. But then it becomes challenging, and you will retain that a lot better because you will experience that anxiety that comes with that. So that's a great thing.
Yeah, and I think those are the moments you will remember.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
You will tap into when you have a similar situation, right?
Yeah, I think when you ask trainees afterwards, like, what did they experience? They're like, well, I felt really anxious when making that decision. It's not just, I had to make that decision. It's, I felt this when I had to make that decision. That's what makes it powerful. Yeah.
Thanks. Just hang on for a bit because I want to talk about how you can implement this in your immersive scenarios. And then we have some time for the Q&A.
Perfect.
Cool. So, the last topic before we go to the Q&A is how do we implement what we have learned today in your immersive scenarios? And I think it was around 3 years ago. I was in a big meeting room, a large table, maybe 12 chairs around it. And I had a meeting with someone from learning and development and some subject matter experts. The goal of that meeting was to create an immersive scenario with the topic of safety. So we discussed a little and soon we agreed to start with the topic dropped objects. And at some point, one of these subject matter experts says, we can create a video of a pump with a camera hanging loose above it. And then the question shows up, what is unsafe in this situation? And we see a lot of safety training done like this. So what is unsafe in this situation? Do you recognize the hazards? The problem with this type of training is that it uses trigger words. So when you are being trained on safety and you read what is unsafe, ping, you are fully focused on unsafe situations. And I don't believe that is the problem. I don't believe that's the moments when accidents happen. I believe those accidents happen when you don't mind safety. So let's take a few steps back. Why do we train safety? To reduce accidents, right? And why do workplace accidents happen? and I had to look it up myself, but some common mistakes are worker overconfidence, workplace distractors, poor housekeeping, and taking job shortcuts. So back in the meeting room, I introduced a story-based approach. I said, imagine you are a mechanic, and at a toolbox meeting, you are told by your supervisor that you have to fix a pump. But quickly, as soon as possible, because otherwise the company loses a very important client. So you, together with a colleague who is really stressed about the situation, hurry to the pump. When you arrive, you are asked, what do you do? And you can select the pump via hotspot, but you can also select the camera. But you have to look actively around to spot the camera. So when you select the pump, your colleague starts fixing it, and the camera falls and hurts your colleague. But when you select the camera, your colleague starts to show his stubborn side, because he doesn't take the safety measures too seriously. He will tell you, oh, that camera, that's been hanging there for months, nothing to worry about. You heard the supervisor, let's start fixing the pump quickly, otherwise you are in big trouble. I put some of the most common causes of accidents in the context of a story. I invite the player to cut corners by a very old storytelling trick, and that's the ticking clock. It's used in all thrillers as well, as we just learned from Dajo. With the supervisor, I create suspense by putting something at stake, by telling you, if you don't finish in time, we lose a big client. This sets the story in motion. I use the stressed colleague to create some workplace distractions. And he also will try to convince you to quickly start fixing the pump, even if you spotted the camera, to see if you are overconfident. And I believe you can do this too. I will ask Dajo later on at the end of this webinar for an exercise to spark your imagination. But maybe first we can start with answering some questions of some of you. So, Dajo, how do you create the right questions for a story-based scenario?
Yeah, that's a good question. The difficult thing is how to make it challenging. So you shouldn't be too obvious. I mean, sometimes you have multiple choice questions where it's very obvious which ones are wrong. So people will start to eliminate, and then they will be like, oh, well, that's kind of plausible, so I'll choose that. So I think the challenge is to create answers where you're like, well, they all have kind of a point. They can all be correct, which makes it very hard and also sparks your attention to be really focused on, okay, what do they actually say? What can be the effect of that? And also sometimes we only use a yes or no question, which can also be very challenging because that's the ultimate dilemma. Will you go left or will you go right? And what I find important is to have those answers be true to the character. So, I mean, sometimes an answer can be kind of out of left field where you're like, well, this doesn't really sound like something that someone would say, like me. So you have to be consistent in all those answers. They all have to sound plausible and all have to sound believable.
Yeah, and I think with storytelling, with creating a scenario or the story around it, you can also create motivations for the player to choose certain decisions, right? So with every answer, you can think of, okay, why should a player select this answer? If you don't have an answer to that, just think of something you can create. So why would someone take the elevator now? Then you can think of, hey, maybe at the beginning of the scenario, we have to write that some colleagues takes the elevator. So you are more invited to take the elevator as well. So in that way, we can use the storytelling or the whole scenario to invite players to make every answer plausible.
Yeah, definitely.
So another question we got, and we already talked about characters, but do you have any tips on character development?
Yeah, I think a useful thing especially for training, is to think in archetypes. So those kinds of character traits that we can immediately understand. So we don't need very complex characters. Like think, for example, an archetype could be a hero or a rebel or a villain or a caretaker or it can be all kinds of those very essential characteristics of a person that you can define by just one word. I think that's very helpful because it immediately gives a sense of who that person is. And also think in the want, what does your character want, which in training is most of the time the game goal. So in drama we also use the need, but that's kind of more a complex thing for film and TV. I think for training the game goal, so it's very important. What does your character want?
And talking about game goals, one of my colleagues, Thijs, wrote a very interesting blog post on how to use game goals and what it is. So I will make sure you get that as well. I think also to stress out is that you cannot create these characteristics for the player, right? But you can do that for the characters, the other characters in the story. What you should do for the player is that you decide what role that person have in the story, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. What's his or her place within this company or whatever hierarchy is at place there? What is your role within that? Yeah.
And it could be a mechanic or maybe a supervisor or I don't know, a new you are new in the company or that could be a start, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
The last question for now, and then I have the question about the exercise, is does it matter how you play a immersive scenario? So maybe via headset or mobile phone to really get into the story?
I don't think it matters that much. I mean, I can say that. I mean, I do encourage people also when watching movies to go to the theater, but we also can have very emotional experiences on watching something on our phone. So why shouldn't that work for VR, I think? I mean, of course, it can be more engaging when putting on the glasses. I think it can be engaging as well. When a story is strong enough, it will probably work across all kinds of mediums. So
yeah, I agree with that. So I believe that when you play an immersive scenario on your phone, so even with just text or reading a book, or we can lose the sense of time, right? So it's so strong, or is storytelling, or can storytelling be? But I do think a VR headset helps eliminating the workplace distractors or the training distractors, right? So you don't see your phone ringing, you don't have colleagues walking around. So with that, maybe it could help in a little bit more focus on the content. But I think that's the only big difference.
Yeah, it takes away some of the external maybe noise that you need to fully engage or immerse yourself into something. Yeah.
Another question is, how many learning goals can you put in one scenario?
Yeah, I think to keep it clear and keep it as concise as possible, so don't introduce too many learning goals. But for me, as a storyteller, the main goal of the game goal is more important because it's about the here and now. It's about what you experience within the story, and the learning goal is something that you will discuss afterwards about what did you learn from achieving this goal or not achieving that goal. So for me, that's for storytelling, the game goal is more interesting.
And do you have an example?
Well, a game goal, like in gaming, it could be rescuing the princess from the castle, but it could also be rescuing a person from a fire, or it has to be very concrete, very visual, very something you can immediately grasp as a player.
And what could be a learning goal in that same situation?
How do you? What strategies do you need to rescue that person, or how do you?
Maybe a door procedure.
Yeah, procedures. How do you make a conversation about a difficult subject? What kind of tools do you need for that? How do you behave in those situations?
Yeah. So a game goal could be rescue someone out the fire, and the learning goal could be what is the door procedure. And maybe you have some multiple learning goals.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, what I always ask clients is, okay, what is the thing you have learned as a player when you put off the headset, when you're done playing? And if you cannot answer that question straight, it's a bit fuzzy, then I think you have picked a topic that's too big. So I think you should be able to answer that quite easily and clearly, and then you have a right learning goal. And you can have multiple learning goals within one scenario. So maybe, and again, also you could say by the example that I gave about the dropped objects, we also make use of the game goal because the supervisor introduced fixing the pump. That's the game goal. In the game, in the scenario, you have to fix the pump quickly. But the learning goal is about dropped objects. Do you recognize under stressed circumstances? Do you recognize the hazards? So again, we make use of game goal and learning goal.
Yeah, and I think also in learning goals, you can have kind of a main learning goal and kind of sub goals that will support that. So when you rescue something from a fire, the procedure is important, but those procedure will have different aspects to it, which can be kind of sub goals, I think, which is what we try to do, apply as well.
Thanks. So we're at the end of this webinar, and I have one last question. Mm-hmm. So do you have any exercise for the viewers what to spark their imagination about storytelling?
Yeah, I have two exercises. I'll start with the one that you can do by yourself. I call it the hallway exercise. We actually did this in film school in the first year. One of the first things you have to write. So imagine a hallway. It can be, we did a hospital hallway, and there's a door at the end of the hallway, and you had to go through that. So the game goal would be literally, or the story goal would be getting through that door. Try to introduce obstacles along the way in the hall to prevent your character from getting through that door. It's very simple, but it forces you to think about conflict, think about all those essential story elements. So for example, it could be a difficult patient blocking your way and wanting something from you, or a bat that's in the way in the hallway. So be as creative as possible. Try to think of as much obstacles as you can before getting through that door. So it's a great way to...
And then you can switch the locations as well, right? Just to
yeah, you can do all kinds of things. A hallway in a like an apartment building or whatever. It can be anything.
Yeah, very cool.
And there's an exercise that can be done in a group, which is a very fun exercise. By the way, to do this, there has to be one person who doesn't know this exercise. So you have to pick someone who hasn't followed this webinar. So you're within a group, and there's kind of a group leader, and he or she has an envelope, and within that envelope is a piece of paper on which a story is written. One of the people in the group has to go outside while everyone in the group reads the story, and then the person comes back in, and by asking questions, he or she has to find out what the story is on a piece of paper. So questions are being asked. Okay, who's the main character? Where are we? Where is it taking place? What's happening? And a story starts to emerge. And when the whole story has been is actually almost written, the envelope is being opened and the piece of paper is blank. So by asking questions, you can intuitively create a story.
This is kind of as well a improvised exercise, or no?
Yeah, and it's very intuitive because it engages it sparks your imagination, your creativity, while all the while you think there's something on the paper and everybody knows something more than you do, but actually you are the one creating the story. So, and also the other ones as well, because they have to make up stuff while the other person is asking the question. So, and I've actually done this a few times, and it always ends up with something very unexpected and actually a great story. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Dajo, many thanks for being here and talking about storytelling. I hope to see you soon.
Yes, thanks for having me. It was great.
And that's it for today. All of you, thank you. We will make sure you get some more information about the things that we talked about. So we'll create a document that you can read with some of the tools and techniques that we talked about today. And I hope to see you next time. Have a great day.